Hello and welcome back to Resident Evil 0. So last time we ran around with Billy, collecting the item we needed to free Rebecca from the room that she had been trapped in. Today we're going to finish that quest, as well as the first segment of this game. Since we will be jumping off this crazy train, I will be returning to previous areas to collect any items that, if left behind, will be lost to us. These items being herbs and ammo, which you've seen the locations of previously. So unless it is a new or a key item, I will cut out the extra backtracking, so forgive any odd jump cuts. While we finish this train up, I want to talk some general trivia about a few subjects. Like some more fun development stuff I had dug up dealing with this game. One of the things that I want to talk about actually deals with the development team itself. The Resident Evil series has a few games that are non-canonical, and I will talk about those in another video. But I mention this as it ties into this fact. At the point that Resident Evil was being produced, all canonical Resident Evil games had been developed by Shinji Mikami and Capcom Production Team 4. But during this time, Resident Evil 0 was actually being produced by Capcom Production Team 3. This makes this the game the first to be developed and produced by a separate team for a canonical game. I also finally found an image of the original concept for the characters to appear in this game. One is definitely not Rebecca, and the other is a very different idea for Billy. Now, I love finding this kind of stuff because I remember seeing this a while back, and I tried to find it again, and finally found it just the other day, and so here it is. Development of Resident Evil 0 is also what helped to push the change going forward in the later parts of the series, making it a little more action-oriented and less survival horror, starting with Resident Evil 4. In an interview with Shinji Mikami, he told the interviewer that he saw how bored and unenthusiastic the production team was during production of this game. This was due to it being another traditional entry and being released a little bit like clockwork. You know, every few years we got a new Resident Evil game and they're all kind of the same. Though I did enjoy the later games for their different ideas and gameplay styles, I did enjoy a somewhat return to form with Resident Evil 7 and Resident Evil 2 Remake. The reimagined Resident Evil 3 wasn't bad. I actually quite enjoy it. But it was, to me, a lot closer in playstyle to the more action-oriented styles that occurred after Zero's release. So coming back to play Resident Evil 0 and getting to really experience that original, survival horror feel again, it's a lot of fun. Speaking of releases, out of curiosity on how well this game sold after it was released, I looked up some numbers. I was actually very happily surprised at the sales that this game has accrued over time, even though it seems that this game is seemingly a bit ignored in the series. From what I can tell, with the original and HD remaster combined, it seems over 4 million units have been sold, with at least 1.3 million of those being the original version. Surprisingly, within 3 months of the remaster being released, it had actually already almost matched that 1.3 million units, selling at 1.1 million units. And it reached the 2 million mark September of 2018, so roughly 2 years after it had been put out onto market. I don't know. I just thought it was interesting because whenever I talk about Resident Evil 0 with some of my friends, though they remember it, it's not a game that they have fond memories of. They just remember it as being a okay game. And I do understand that. The story for this game, in some ways, makes sense and doesn't at the same time. They tried very hard to tie it into the other Resident Evil games, with Resident Evil 1 and all that. But, Rebecca's going through this train. She's already going through all this zombie type stuff. And then you get to Resident Evil, and she's kind of a little more afraid of things again. And you would think she'd be a little more heartened to the situation going on in Resident Evil, the first game, if she had already gone through and survived something like this. But at the same time, I kind of get it. What people don't think about, in my opinion, when they play Resident Evil 0 and then play Resident Evil 1 is, yeah, Rebecca has survived a train full of zombies in the training facility and all the monsters thereof. But she still doesn't escape. She doesn't get a chance to decompress from that situation and really figure things out and find out how it affects her. She's still in the middle of it. So she still has to see the zombies. She still has to see the monsters within the Spencer estate. And it doesn't give her a time to normalize it, in a sense. She's always on edge. She has to survive. I doubt she probably sleeps, even, between Resident Evil 0 and Resident Evil 1. Because, as you'll see by the end of the game, we start off at night, and we go until morning of the next day. During that time, during the next day, the next team comes in at night again. So an evening, right? I don't think Rebecca sleeps in that 24 hours, and that makes it harder to also keep calm. You're tired, your nerves are frayed, and all that kind of stuff. So it makes sense to me, at least, that Rebecca might be a little more afraid and a little more on edge still of the monsters that she's already seen and faced. She hasn't had time to, like I said, decompress, to sleep, to take it all in, to say, oh, I survived. No, I am still surviving. She hasn't survived yet. She's never left the situation. She only had a brief moment between leaving the training facility and entering the estate where she might not have been harried by zombies or monsters. The moment you enter the estate, it's on again. And so I accept how Rebecca acts in the mansion, even knowing how she had to survive the training facility in the previous game. What I do find a little funny, and though it makes sense gameplay-wise for Resident Evil 1, is that Rebecca doesn't tell Chris any of the stuff that she discovered on the train or in the training facility. You don't want to give it away too early in the game, so Rebecca can't tell Chris gameplay-wise. That doesn't mean that possibly the canon for the games isn't Rebecca knew what happened, explained to Chris, and then they tried to escape. You know, with the games, it's Rebecca goes to the train, finds out kind of what's going on, goes to the mansion, and Chris and Jill find out what's going on without the aid of, like, Rebecca, Barry, and all that, giving them what the information they might already have is. You know, but that's just gameplay-wise. You have to discover it for those characters. They can't just be given it narratively like Rebecca might have been able to once she and Chris encounter each other in the next game. That is just how I take the reasons why the games hook up between Resident Evil 0 and Resident Evil 1, besides the obvious things. And so, like I said, I was very pleasantly surprised to see the amount of units that have been sold for this game, because I really do think people overlook Resident Evil 0 as a good touchstone for the lore involved in these games. Just because of some of the inconsistencies that they find between these two games. Now, let's switch tracks and talk a little bit about some fun in-game stuff. I want to begin with a little factoid about side characters within the game. The only side character who appears in a real-time cutscene is Edward Dewey. All the other side characters, such as Albert Wesker, only get shown in FMV or full motion video sequences. Another fun thing that only happens in the full motion video is at the beginning of the game. Rebecca's flashlight during the opening of the game is attached to her pistol, which vanishes to never return upon entering the train. Something else to be seen that seems to be a reoccurring reference within the Resident Evil games, though, is a reference to the band Queen. The tattoo running down Billy's right arm isn't a tribal tat, but rather is 2 words. Those words, Mother Love. Mother Love is the title of a song from the album Made in Heaven, released in 1995. This was also the first time a Queen reference was made and used in-game without being used with a Redfield family member. Any other time you see a Queen reference, it's usually on one of the Redfield's jackets, such as Claire having the title of the album that Mother Love is from, Made in Heaven, on the back of one of her jackets. One random bit of trivia I noticed playing this game, though. The weight restriction listed for the hookshot is made in kilograms rather than pounds, though this game takes place on the outskirts of a U.S. city. Something else that occurred to me is that though the original build of Resident Evil 0 had plans to include speedier zombies, and they did end up being included in the Resident Evil remake as the Crimson Head, which is a nastier, faster, stronger zombie, they are not included in 0. This struck me as odd, as the remake was actually released before Resident Evil 0 came out. So I decided to look up some stuff. I discovered a statement made by a producer to explain this occurrence. Basically, though Rebecca and Billy are forced to tangle with zombies, they do not spend enough time in any one area to encounter the second stage infection of the zombie caused by the virus. I kind of thought that was interesting, as it is definitely hinting at the amount of time spent between Resident Evil 0 and Resident Evil 1. You apparently spend more time in the Spencer estate than you do on the train or the training facilities in 0. And I can believe that. Like I said, you start out, it's about 12 hours that you spend in the train and facility and all that together before you end up at the estate. And the virus has already been rampant in the estate for a little bit, so it has more time to further change the creatures that are infected by it, as well as the fact that you spend more time in the estate. I can believe that being the case for why the Crimson Head does not appear in 0 compared to Resident Evil Remake. And thankfully, I'm grateful. I could not imagine having to face down a Crimson Head on the train. That would have been a nightmare. So, after looking up some info about the zombies, I decided to see if there was any other info about the Stinger and Cerberus monsters as well. So, besides the weakened head carapace mentioned in the notes about how our giant scorpion friend was affected by his T-virus mutation, there was another big reason production of this BOW was halted. As the Stinger mutated and grew larger, the venom sac actually regressed. This means that no matter how much you may be stung, you will never become poisoned. That drawback, along with the weakened armor, are what halted any further production of the Stinger-type BOW beyond the one we fight. This does also explain the lack of blue herbs on the train, as the blue herbs are the only way to cure poison in-game.
Okay.
The full heal item that you can pick up, the first aid spray, only heals your health and doesn't heal any other effects in the game, like poison status. Something else I discovered when I decided to double check that fact about the first aid spray being able to cure poison, yes or no, is that the first aid spray is actually an Umbrella product. The first aid spray is part of how Umbrella made a lot of their money legally. It was one of their first big pharmaceutical items that they produced and sold that were not black market like their BOW research was. The other creature I was curious about, like I said, was the Cerberus, or the zombie dog. Now, you encounter them in this game as well as several others. So, much like the Stinger, these were also phased out of potential use as BOWs. This was due to the psychological changes that occurred as the virus mutated them. As the virus raged through their systems, they became extremely aggressive, and territorial as well, making them impossible to train reliably. So even if the zombie dog or Cerberus had been a pre-trained animal, they lost that function in their brain as the virus mutated them. And they would work in packs still, as mentioned in, I believe, the first Resident Evil, about the wild animals attacking people in the woods. It was a pack of Cerberus that had escaped the Spencer estate.
This is Delta Team. This is Delta Team. We have gained control of the train. Over.
Understood.
This does not make any sense. How was the T-virus leaked? And why did it contaminate both the lab and the mansion, as well as a train almost 3 miles away?
That's irrelevant. We must make sure no knowledge of this gets out. Destroy the train. Completely. How far away are you from the nearest branch line?
About 10 minutes to...
What happened?
So, though we do not encounter many of these creatures in-game, as, like I said, the production was halted, there is a explanation for why we do encounter as many as we do. It is assumed by the community, and also hinted at in some notes, that most of the Cerberus that we encounter in-game are actually mutated guard dogs that were exposed accidentally during the outbreaks. It is thought that any dog exposed would basically become the same way, even though what you face in game are all the Doberman Pinscher, or the Doberman, or whatever, Doberman guard dog. I just thought it was interesting because it means that, had they used German Shepherds, that's what we would be facing. I wanted to interrupt my conversation about the Cerberus just to give you guys some little general tips for this section of the game, because if you've never played it before, even watching a little thing like this, you might miss something. There is this black key card. You need to pick it up before you leave the room. There's also a hidden cache of handgun ammo that you can just barely see underneath the cabinet behind the key card. Key card is the most important thing, though. If you do not pick this up, you will not have enough time to get down to where you need to use it, come back, pick it up, and get back to where you need to use it again before the train derails and you die. So make sure you grab it before you leave. Other than that, stay calm. You have enough time, as long as you have the key card, to get down to where you need to go and finish the section of the game. That's it. Back to the Cerberus! Now, personally, I hate the Cerberus, but in a good way. I know that sounds weird, but mind you, there is a way to enjoy and hate an enemy at the same time. So by good way, I do mean that this creature stresses me out a little bit. My anxiety amps up, and I just want them gone. And that's kind of what you want in a game like this when you encounter some creatures. You want that feeling of, oh, I need these gone, I don't want to see them, all that kind of stuff, right? And even when I know that I will be facing them, my hand tense up a little bit on my controller. Everything you want to feel in a horror experience is what I get with these as compared to a lot of the other creatures in game. I don't know what it is about these creatures. Like I said, they cause that kind of feeling in me that you get when you watch a really good horror movie or play a really good horror game, that little scare feeling that you know something's coming and, oh, right? Now, I can recall the first time I ever encountered them in-game. It was in the original PlayStation version of Resident Evil. My friends and I were all camped out around the TV, my best friend, his oldest brother, and myself, and we're playing the game. And it happens relatively early on, just like in Resident Evil 0. And you go on, and the way they build up the tension even in the first game, a little bit more than they do here. Like, they build it up a little bit with Edward popping in right through the window and that's supposed to make you jump a little bit. Like, oh! And then you're like, oh, it's safe. You know, Edward, it's just Edward, and he tells you, you know, monsters and all this kind of stuff. And then the dogs, ha! Right?
Edward! No.
Well, in the very first Resident Evil game, there's a hallway that you go down. And when you're going down it, you hear the glass kind of crack, just
Stop.
right?
Don't come
And
any closer.
I remember when my friend was playing, he stopped. We all kind of looked at each other because we'd already run into our first zombie, and so now we're like, oh, what's this? And we continued on down the hallway. It doesn't happen right away, right? You just hear that glass crack. And you run into zombies here and there and all that kind of stuff. Well, the second time you end up in the hallway, the windows break and Cerberus jump through. My friend tossed his controller and we all jumped. That was, I think, the second death we received in-game. It was the Cerberus, because we were all like, ah! And they got my friend. And I love that. I love that the Cerberus are used effectively for scares. It's never just a, oh, you know, like, there's dogs here, rah, 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 right? No, it's like with Resident Evil 0, it's like with the Resident Evil and Resident Evil Remake, even Resident Evil 2. You know sometimes that something's coming. You feel some kind of way, right? Edward breaks through the window in 0 and kind of down your anxiety. Things are okay. We've only faced zombies, all this kind of stuff. And then the dogs come in. Boom! Right? And you're face to face with the one, and then you move, and another one comes out from the window behind you. Or in front of you. I can't remember.
This is Rebecca.
Where it
I've
is.
engaged
Okay,
the
at that
control
moment,
device for the brake.
suddenly
Over.
it's two dogs. It's not just the one.
I'll put the brake
The first
on
one jumps
now.
through, you know, it ramps up your anxiety, all that kind of stuff, and you think you're okay, and then another one joins out of nowhere. I like that. Same thing with Resident Evil. You know, the window cracks, nothing, and then you come back through a little bit later, and they break through, and there's the dogs. And that's how they used every time. They're used as an effective jump scare. It's not just a know-nothing jump scare, because they kind of give you a hint at something that's going to happen. Just like with Resident Evil 2. In the original and the remake, there is a canine area, right? Makes sense. It's a police station, they might have canine dogs. When you first go in there, the dogs are all in their cages. Yes, they're growling, all that kind of stuff. They're in their cages. You're safe. And I think you can go through the area for a little bit until you pick up a certain item, and when you come back, they bust out. And now they're attacking you in that small room, and they also attack you out in the garage. And I love that, because you can walk through that area and nothing happens. They bark, and they bounce off the cages. You hear as they bounce off the cages, and nothing. They don't break through, so, okay, you're probably safe. You know, because you figure if you see them, and they can't get to you, well, it could be like some of the other zombie areas, where you can see the zombies, but they can't reach you. Like, by one of the rooms in the original Resident Evil 2, zombies reach through the window and they can grab you, but they can't get to you otherwise, right?
Yes,
you know they're there,
we managed.
you see the effects of them, but
to find a
they
way
can't.
out.
They don't break through the boards to get you. And so you figure it's kind of the same thing with the zombie dogs in that section. They hit the cage door, they bounce off, nothing happens, good to go. And then you come back through, and boom, they're through the cages at you. Resident Evil 3 Nemesis did something similar where dogs would pop up here and there, and that's okay. It wasn't done as effectively as 0, 1, and 2, but it wasn't done too badly. I do have to say the Resident Evil 3 remake has a very effective use of the Cerberus, in that they kind of tell you, hey, look, you know, there's this generator right here. You've heard the dogs a little bit in the background here and there, like howling here and there, but you haven't seen them, but you know they're there somewhere.
The Umbrella
Come around a
Research
corner,
Center?
and all of a sudden these dogs are ripping down the alley at you. And they're fast. And it's hard to get a beat on them, and you have to use your surroundings proper. I love that. I love the tension that the servers build in the game. I hate them for it at the same
First
time.
general manager.
So
Dr.
I guess you could
James
say
Marcus.
I hate them very fondly.
Who on earth are those people?
She's just a rookie, a member of
Now,
STARS.
one last little bit of fun
What
trivia,
about the mail?
and something that
I'm
amused me
unfamiliar with
very
that.
much when I found out
This is Dr. Marcus.
this fact.
Please be
The
silent
man
as we
who
reflect
has been
upon our
behind
company motto.
producing The creatures that have fed my nightmare fuel at times. The one who is somewhat considered the father of the Resident Evil series, Shinji Mikami, started out making Disney games.
You.
It was I who
That's
scattered
right.
the T-virus in the
Disney
mansion.
games. So,
Needless to say, I contaminated the train.
games that involve Mickey or
What?
any other Disney property.
Revenge on Umbrella.
And I have to wonder, what kind of hell did this man face to change from making games from the Mouse's Kingdom to producing games that Romero would have been at home making movies about? Makes you wonder, how terrible is Disney? Right? Anyways, let's go ahead and enjoy the rest of this game. I'll see you guys
Dr.
next
Marcus?
time when we enter the facility proper.
10 years ago, Dr.
guys.
Marcus was murdered by Umbrella. You helped them, didn't you?